you want that good feeling that comes from doing things for other folks, then you have to pay for it in abuse and misunderstanding. Zora. Let's explore the life of one of the greatest black women to be involved in a period of time known as Harlem Renaissance. In the book Storyteller Life by Janelle Yates, we'll examine the life of one such woman, born on January the 7th, 1891, the fifth of 8 children. There was born one Zora Neale Hurston. Her father was a preacher, and her mother was a homemaker and former school teacher. As a child, she lived in the first incorporated black township of Eatonville, Florida. She never saw herself just as an ordinary black person, just as a person. Jump at the sun. We might not land on the sun, but at least we'll get our feet off the ground. This was a quote that Zora's mother quoted to her often. Her mother always raised her to speak her mind and never to be afraid of it. Her father, on the other hand, felt she was too bold and couldn't stand it. At 13, her mother died, and her father sent her to Jacksonville to attend boarding school. Just 3 months after her mother died, he remarried. It broke Zora's heart. She would stay at boarding school for a year before being put out and sent back to Eatonville, Florida. Upon returning, she found out that her father's new wife was just awful. She hated children, she couldn't stand them, and she wanted them out of her house. Every day, Zora would see this woman propped up on her mother's feather bed, and it made Zora sick. She wanted that woman off her mama's bed. So she called her brother and said, "Let's get mama's bed." They drug it out to the street, and before they could get it all the way out into the road, she called her husband and said, "Hey, they're still in the bed." The daddy and the mother get into a fight, and Zora leaves her father's house, never to return. She would live with relatives, one after another, until they all put her out because they said she needs to work if she was going to stay there. Finally, she moved in with her brother Bob, who treated her more like a maid than he did family. At 16, she worked for an actress in a traveling acting company. And once she arrived in Baltimore, she left the acting company and decided it was time for her to go back to school. She would complete her high school graduation and go on to attend Howard University. Early in 1920, Zora would move to Harlem, New York, and become part of the Harlem Renaissance era. She wrote short stories, and the first of 1927, after reading one of her short stories, she was awarded a scholarship to Barnard College. Upon her completion at Barnard College, she began to write folklore. She would travel from country to country, state to state, and just talk to black people in particular and find out what their stories were. In 1937, she wrote Their Eyes Were Watching God, her most famous novel. This is also the novel she received her highest pay for, $943.75. According to her online biography, she would never receive this much money for any of her other works. One famous collaborator was Mule Bone, written with another Harlem Renaissance writer, Langston Hughes, for their magazine Fire. But because they argued over who was going to actually own it, they fell apart, never to mend their friendship. The full work was not published until 1991. Always being poor, in 1945 she felt compelled to write a letter to W.E. Du Bois suggesting that a cemetery for the illustrious black Negroes that died be built. She didn't feel that Negro celebrities should be neglected and deaf, no matter their financial condition. Du Bois ignored her. She went on to write 2 more novels, one of which was her autobiography, Dust Tracks on the Road, in 1942, but she never experienced the fame that she had with her earlier works. Zora suffered a stroke in 1959. Having been financially broke and unable to care for herself, she spent the remainder of her days at St. Lucy's County Welfare Home, where she died on January the 28th, 1960. A collection was taken up by Zora's friends to bury her, but they did not have enough to actually put a headstone on her grave. She was buried in the segregated cemetery, and it just grew up. Nobody remembered her. Mainly banished by the literary public, her works would have new life in the early 70s when Alice Walker would shine new light on this artist. Alice Walker felt like Zora needed to be recognized, so out of her own pocket, she purchased a headstone for her grave and added this epitaph: the genius of the South. Before Maya Angelou, before Alice Walker, before Toni Morrison, there was Zora.
Who is Maya Angelou?